Greetings, colleagues, fellow viewers, ladies and gentlemen. This is our monthly show, HR Development and Management 101 Conversation. The show that recognizes, honors, and celebrate our leaders from the human resources fraternity. It's beautiful to have you, colleagues, so early in the morning. Welcome to our CEO of the Institute of People Management, the organization that is partnered with COMETSA Global Online Channels to bring you these leaders. Greetings, Boniwe, our HR specialist representing the broader membership of the Institute of People Management and the broader stakeholders across the world. My friend George, my fellow coach, greetings to you and our guests. I would like to welcome you and I would like to hand over to my colleagues to start this conversation. I know it is going to be quite very insightful, and thank you for honoring the invitation. Over to you, my colleague.
Sam, I will start and say we are so blessed today to have these two wonderful women in a month in which we celebrate Women's Month. So we are really, really proud to have Nontuthuko Mgabhi from the Richards Bay Coal Terminal and Candice Watson from AECI. These are veterans, these are HR heads, and they have a lot of experience. And as you said, Sam, we are celebrating them this time. And I will let our DJ, our sister Boniwe, to kick off with the first question.
Thank you so much, Sam, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Jerry. Nontuthuko and Candice, welcome to our monthly Human Resources and Development 101. As Sam has actually said, it is a program whereby we celebrate our HR leaders across the globe, and where we actually get our young aspiring HR practitioners to make sure that they get advice firsthand from people that have actually been through the journey. So we will, during this time, get to hear from you as you share your experiences, as you provide insights, and as you provide advice in terms of how do we navigate the world of work generally, and how do we make sure that we actually continue to make sure that human resources does retain its seat at the strategic table, and it actually has that voice, and how do we make sure that we make the profession glamorous more than anything else. So to start off, I think it will be only prominent for us to actually get to hear from you in terms of tell us about your career, where it started, how you actually ended up being where you are today. And maybe Candice, let me start with you.
First of all, thank you for this wonderful opportunity, Dr. Gould and my fellow panelists. And I think for me, human resources wasn't a default. It was a deliberate choice I made. I started off just a very young girl growing up in the townships of Soweto, and I looked at my circumstances and I decided that, you know, we might come from a certain set of circumstances, but it doesn't have to determine where you are and who you are in life. We are a product of the choices and the decisions we make. So I always had a very keen interest in two fields, engineering or in psychology. But I chose psychology because I really wanted to understand the human psyche and how we are able to transform our lives by specific choices we make. So I went to University of Johannesburg. I did an undergrad and honors degree in clinical psychology, including subjects in industrial psychology. And then I had my first role in HR with SAP as an HR graduate. And I think that's really where my passion for HR was unleashed from a commercial angle. Because how the program worked is that you spent almost a year doing two jobs, learning how to be an HR practitioner and at the same time, how a business works. And I think as soon as I landed in that role and I completed the program, my interest in business then grew, and I decided, you know what, I have this very social science background. I need to augment my knowledge with information and knowledge around business. So I then went off to business school. I did a postgrad in business. A few years later, I did my master's in business, and I'm in the final throes of doing a doctorate in business through the University of Cape Town. And I think the reason I share the academic journey, because I think sometimes as HR professionals, because we don't have things like formal board exams or, like some other professions, people underestimate the importance of weaving that academic background into your practical experience. And I found that very useful for me. So I think my journey started off as a graduate in HR. I spent about 2 years with SAB. I then moved into the banking sector. I was an HR consultant there for them for about 2 years. And then I moved into the industrial. So Avis Fleet Services, I was the HR director for Southern Africa. I was then moved into a role as HR director for Bollywood Logistics internationally. I did that for a few years, and then I moved as the head of HR for Lenovo for Africa. From Lenovo, I moved on to Pernod Ricard as the HR director for Sub-Saharan Africa. I was then approached for a role with British American Tobacco, spent about almost 2-3 years there with them as the head of talent, and then HR director for Sub-Saharan Africa. And then I landed in my current role, which is Group Executive Human Capital and Transformation for AECI, which is a diversified industrials organization providing essential services across water safety, mining solutions, food security, agro and animal health. We operate about in 6 continents, 22 countries. We've got about a headcount of 7,000 employees. And with myself, the board, the CEO, we drive the human capital strategy for the business. So I hope, Boniwe, that gave you a little bit of a flavor about who I am.
No, it does. And thank you so much. And probably to ask you, what does your typical day look like?
Well, my typical day has to start with caffeine. I think if I don't have a cup of coffee, people should just not talk to me at all. So I think for me, my typical day usually is either a set of meetings with the board subcommittees, exco meetings, or my human capital exco, setting the strategy, checking in, monitoring implementation of the strategy, sometimes service providers, but not often because that happens within the different businesses. And I think all around just leadership in terms of the function and leadership in terms of the execution of the human capital agenda.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing. Nontuthuko, over to you. Please share with us and take us through your career journey and tell us how you actually got to land at the Richards Bay Coal Terminal today.
Greetings, colleagues. Thanks, Boniwe. I'm an alumni of University of KwaZulu Natal. That's where I did my undergrad honors up to master's level. Initially, I had majored in both industrial psychology and general psychology because initially I always wanted, I want to be a psychologist. But the most common one is a clinical psychologist. So I was more inclined to go and do clinical psychology. But I also appreciated that I don't know much about industrial psychology, and I was quite curious. So I decided, let me major in both, because often what we sometimes do is we think we know without having explored things. Sometimes it's good to do as many things as possible so that you can actually appreciate which one comes natural to you. So for my undergrad, I did both general psychology and industrial psychology. And needless to say that industrial psychology, I was so fascinated by it. And I was also doing exceptionally well in industrial psychology compared to general psychology. Then I ended up indeed pursuing industrial psychology to postgraduate level honors and masters. I kicked off my career really in HR at South African breweries, where I did my internship as an intern psychologist at Prospecting in Durban. And then I wrote my board exam and I'm a qualified industrial psychologist. Then I pursued a career in HR. And it's quite interesting that when you are a high school girl in psychology or even in industrial psychology, you often think you will finish and start your own practice and be a businesswoman that does
I can
most.
relate.
Right?
I can relate.
So when I got into HR, I actually loved the space, and I realized that actually to go start my own practice and die of boredom there, maybe I can pack that for later. I must say I had an amazing leader, coach, and mentor as my first boss, Surya Singh at South African Breweries. She made me fall in love with HR. She's one person who loves what she does. And for me, I looked at her as a mentor, a mother, a boss, and her work ethic really it was contagious. It was easy to mimic. It was easy to follow her footsteps. So I was given ample opportunities at SA Breweries. Then I got an opportunity at Rio Tinto, Richards Bay Minerals in Richards Bay. Then I moved there as an HR practitioner. And I also got so much growth there and opportunities. And within 6 months, I was promoted to be a talent management advisor. 6 months later, as a senior talent management advisor, I enjoyed my career at Rio Tinto. An opportunity to be an organizational development manager and OD manager came at Richards Bay Coal Terminal. Then I moved to Richards Bay Coal Terminal. I think within a year or a year and a half, an opportunity in corporate affairs came. And I'm highlighting this because very often when we are in our field and that we love so much, we sometimes lack the flexibility and allowing ourselves to move because our skills should be mobile, portable. We should be flexible. So my boss said, known to you an OD manager, but I actually think I want to combine OD department with corporate affairs. Do you think you can manage? And I was like, I didn't study PR or anything. But I remember what Richard Branson once said, if you're offered an opportunity, even if you are not ready, say yes, you'll be ready along the way. Then I said, indeed, yes, I'd love to do that. And then I headed now both OD and corporate affairs. And a year later, in 2017, I was promoted to general manager of human resources at Richards Bay Coal Terminal. So that's where I am right now, looking after, obviously, all the areas within HR, including corporate affairs.
Great. That's a good one. And I think you're right. Curiosity will actually get you ahead and grab each opportunity. Nobody was actually born with any skill, right? We learn along the way as we are given opportunities. And still probably remaining with you, Nontu. The other thing is that like the aim of this show is also to make sure that we provide HR advice to actually young and aspiring HR practitioners in the industries, and to our listeners today that our listeners and viewers today, if you were to give them advice on what they need to do for them to actually build a career in human resources, what would you say to them?
You're asking an interesting question, especially in the context of how things have changed. But my advice would be deeply curious about people and have a drive to make an impact. For me, I found that to be one thing that has supported my growth, to look for tangible problems that you can solve as an HR practitioner. And very often when we think about things that we can solve, we often want to think about big strategic things, forgetting that extraordinary people actually do ordinary things consistently every day. My advice would be also do the hard work. Very often it's human nature that we are irritable about the next step. And while it's good to aspire to grow, and growth will come by doing hard work, I earlier on mentioned my first boss, Suraya Singh. When I got there, I learned her ways. She would be at work 30 minutes before time, and she would leave 30 minutes or an hour after the checkout or clock out time. And I quickly learned that coming in 30 minutes before you do your work provides you a space to plan your day. Therefore, it allows you to reflect on what hard work I want to do today, what work of impact I want to do today. Even today, where I sit, I still look for opportunities to do the hard work. I'll give you an example. In 2017, when I was given an opportunity to be General Manager of Human Resources, at that point, female representation at Richards Bay Coltimal, although we've been doing an amazing work in terms of transformation and really the milestone, building the momentum, but female representation was still sitting at about 26%. And when I got in, my hard work to be done was that by 2023, at least we must have 35% of females at RBCT. And I look forward for also come 2026, 2027, or slightly beyond, where we will have equal numbers, because why not? Because when we still target 30% for women, that is 70% affirmation of men. Why not target 50% for women? It's hard work that still needs to be done. When we look at things such as sexual harassment in the workplace, what we have introduced is Women at Work survey, so that we can get what are the challenges of women in the workplace. We hear about the second pandemic, gender-based violence. Our organizations don't exist in isolation. They exist in a society that sees it as normal for women to do A, B, C, D. This means that culture still permeates in our organizations, although we may have great values. But how do we challenge that culture? So again, my advice is do the hard work and look for opportunities to make an impact in your own personal way,
Great, thank you so much. I think that's quite a lot, and that's quite profound advice that you've given there. Candice, what would you say to somebody that's actually completing her honors degree in either psychology or human resources, someone that just stepped into a graduate program recently, or someone that just got promoted from an HR consultant to an HR VP? What advice would you give them to make themselves out of the human resources profession?
Yeah, I think there's two things. The one is a behavioral element, which Nontu absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think in a world of social media, instant gratification, and really a superficialness where people really don't have, they can be very successful without any substance. You have to do the hard work. I think that's for me, that's been my work ethic, putting in the hours, and not just putting in the hours for presenteeism's sake, but really making sure your time counts. That behavioral element will really take you in any direction, whether you pursue a career in human resources or any field that you choose. It's really just to bring the work ethic and to make sure you do the hard things and you actually spend the time to perfect your craft and to perfect your art, whether it's working with people or working with numbers. So I think for me, that's the one non-negotiable. And in the other non-negotiables, you really have to love what you do. And I know people say that, how can you love a job, because you have to get up at a certain time and, people love, I don't know, yoga or art or whatever. But I think for me, love is not an emotional feeling. But it's a choice and a commitment to pursue whichever field you are in, regardless of the obstacles you face. And I always tell my children, my son will be going off to university next year, and I had a conversation with him yesterday, and I said, Josh, ease is a greater threat to progress in society than hardship. I said, as a society, yes, riots is hard, unemployment is hard. We're dealing with a lot of hard topics. Women underrepresentation in management and in key decision-making roles. Those are hard things. But it's the ease and the complacency of not doing anything to change that status quo that is really detracting from our progress as a society. So I think for me, building on what Nontu say, bring your work ethic, do the hard things, and do it from a premise of love. It's your passion. It's what you want to do. Instead of, and I think Nontu said it as well, being focused on what's next. I think if you had asked me 16 years ago when I started my HR graduate program, would I be on the show and being interviewed and group executive, having traveled the world with human resources, I probably would have said no. Because I wasn't focused on what's going to happen in 16 years. I was focused on when I get to the office today, I have to do my best and I have to bring my best talent to my role. So I think that would be my advice for Niwe.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, ladies. And I think our listeners and our viewers are actually learning as much as I am actually learning on this side of the world. And probably still remaining with you, Candice. We are actually in difficult times, and we will actually touch on that later on when we're talking about the challenges that COVID has brought and all of the other challenges that we have faced as a country and as a world. But how do you deal with difficult times? Generally as a leader and as a person, how do you get yourself out of challenging times to make sure that your wellness is taken care of and you're always in a position of bringing the best out of yourself?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword because leaders are human beings as well. We have the same fears. We deal with the same level of complexity, if not more so, because you're not just responsible for yourself, but for the people you are leading and your families and the organizations. And I think for me, the way you need to navigate your wellness in crisis is to acknowledge that you are in a crisis. I think, the pop psychology, we can do it, high five, bump, live your best life. That's only going to take you so far. But you first have to acknowledge that we are in a situation of crisis. And what resources do I have available around me to navigate this crisis? And if your inventory of resources available to navigate wanes in comparison to what you need to get through it, you need to know when to put your hand up and ask for help, whether it's from family, whether it's friends, whether it's your line manager, whether it's employee wellness systems, whether it's therapy, medical practitioners, whatever it is. You need to understand that we were not designed to operate successfully independently as human beings, and people need other people. So I think for me, the balance was when you identify the crisis you are in, is to say, what do I have to navigate this and what do I need to get through it successfully? And in making those decisions and those calls. So whether it's even something as simple as, well, the gyms are closed now, I have to run around the block at home. That's part of how you build resilience. And I think for me, that's the important thing. And then finally, it's that guiding light and principle along the lines of, I'm in the situation that seems chaotic and full of crisis by design. How I'm going to get through it is a decision that I need to make and choices that I will make on a daily basis. And my dad, which he's late now for a few years, he always told us, he said, you know what? Tough times don't last, but tough people do. And I think that balance of knowing that I'm in a tough situation, we're in a pandemic, people are losing their jobs, it is a bit chaotic out there. But for everything, there is a season. Even the book of Ecclesiastes says it. That for everything, there's a season. And seasons start and seasons end. And I think if you keep that mindset that I'm in a crisis, I recognize it, I look at the resources I need to navigate it, I reach out where I don't have the necessary resources. And keeping the mental attitude that for every beginning, there's an end. I think that's really helped me to navigate through some very tough and difficult situations during the pandemic.
Great. I think it's important for us to always ask for help and know when we actually need to reach out to others. Right. Thanks so much. And Nondu, what have you done on your side to cope with difficult times that you have faced as a leader?
Interesting question you've asked. Yeah, I love running. And yeah, I'm a long distance runner. So since last year, there hasn't been marathons. But again, for me, it was just to gain perspective, because sometimes it's very easy to complain from a space of privilege, because what privilege does is that it makes us blind, right? Little inconveniences feels like oppression because you don't know oppression. So I just, instead of really moaning about marathons, I just counted my blessings. I'm still breathing normally without an aid of an oxygen. Family members are alive. Yes, my dad had serious COVID, was in hospital, ICU for about 2 months, but he survived it. For me, it was really, and also I still have a job. We still have not retrenched anyone at work. Employees are still alive. Yes, we've had COVID, and unfortunately, we also lost one employee due to COVID. But it is also just gaining some perspective and also start appreciating small things. You remember with the hard lockdown where you could not even go and buy non-essential stuff. And suddenly you realize that yogurt is a luxury. You don't need that. You're not going to for yogurt, isn't it? And it just kept us grounded. But what I continued to do is exercising, running, because it's very important. I think Candice said it so well, that as leaders, it's important that we appreciate that there's a reason why, for example, when you're on the plane and you're sitting on the emergency line where they say, put on your vest first before helping someone else. So as leaders, it's important that we put on our vest first. Why? Because if we don't put on our vest first, if our colleagues come to us with a problem, we'll be the first one to snap. Why? Because we are not regulated ourselves. So it's important to find a way to regulate yourself, because once you're regulated, when you think and respond, you respond from your brain, the top part, the cortex, the one that has got thinking and reflecting, instead of the bottom one that is more reactive. So for me, staying active, exercising, I've always valued that, because very often, Moniwe, health is like money. We don't really appreciate its value until it's gone. And we love our job, we work hard, but when your health is challenged, you be prepared to sell everything you've worked for just to live. So why don't you just prioritize that first? So, and what we have also done, thanks to the OD department, is also to send messages of hope every Monday. Because Moniwe this time also did highlight to us that people are going through a lot. We had some employees who lost both parents, some just a matter of 5 days apart. We had people who really had maybe their spouse being retrenched. So a lot has happened. So how do we also, once we've regulated ourselves, bring some form of regulation? We've also seen the use of alcohol. The numbers go up. How do we then educate that alcohol and abuse of alcohol is dangerous? It may seem like something that can regulate you, but it is actually very detrimental to your health. And as South Africans, we do know that South Africans abuse alcohol. So you can imagine this time, it's a drug of choice for people to self-regulate. So for me, Boniwe, it's been really exercising and prioritizing sleep and reading and relaxing and engaging. When you engage with people, you gain so much perspective, because suddenly you also turn the focus away from yourself. Because if you keep too much focus on yourself, your challenges can only grow. But when you engage with others, make an impact, make someone smile, give them a compliment, then suddenly you start to feel rich, because doing that's like giving a hug. You can't give a hug without receiving one back.
Of course, of course. And now that you've spoken about reading, please share with us what is your latest read?
Interesting you're saying that. My latest read, Bonnie, is a book titled What Happened to You. I encourage people to read that book. It's written by Oprah Winfrey together with a child psychologist. It's an interesting book to read, What Happened to You, just to highlight the book. The book helps us not to judge. Often it's human nature to lean into when Boniwe is doing something that is maybe not in line with the norm. We are quick to judge Boniwe. What's wrong with Boniwe? Instead of asking what happened to Boniwe. And from a question of what happened to Boniwe, we then respond differently than from a question of what's wrong with Boniwe.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, ladies. I think this has been actually quite insightful. The learnings, your career journeys. I believe that most practitioners can't wait to hear more in the next second segment of the show, and people are inspired. Like I believe I'm inspired right now. Josh.
Thank you. I'm actually very inspired myself by the two ladies. I remember going back when I was a little one, there's a rhyme that was called Count Your Blessings, name them one by one. And so what I've heard from you ladies is exactly that. You start from there and move on. But let's change the subject a little bit, because both of you come from industries that have sophisticated logistics, you have warehousing, and we've had some unrest in the past 2 weeks. Can you comment whether you were impacted? And if so, well, how did you deal with it? How did you deal with your people to ensure that they remained safe? And I can start with you, Candice.
Yeah, I think when we saw the riots breaking out, because we have production facilities across South Africa, but specifically in KZN and Gauteng. What we realized, obviously, at the time, and it was well documented in media, that the police force was just not sufficient to cover the impact of the riots and looting. So what we then did as a leadership team is just to activate our private security companies to come alongside the government to support them. At the same time, with our external stakeholder relations executive that was in contact with government departments and SANDF to support and to collaborate with SANDF on some of our key points. The nature of our products and services, producing obviously detonators for underground mining and explosive. Some of our sites is national key points. And there comes a set of protection with national key points from the government. So we had to make sure that with private security in collaboration with government security agencies, that we protect not just the assets, but our people as well. And during this time, the message to our staff was that your safety is our priority. So typically, and any HR practitioner would know that when you have these things like riots, etc., it's usually no work, no pay. But the decision we took is that people would be on paid leave during this time because, you know, we can always replace and claim insurance for an asset, but the person's life is invaluable. So during that time, even though we did suffer some impact, thankfully, because of the collaboration of private security companies, SANDF, and government security agencies, we were able to navigate this very period of unrest and just chaos in our country. And we're back to full capacity and back to production. What was also very important for us during this time is the impact on food security. So as an organization, from the onset of the pandemic, we realized that there's really going to be, especially in South Africa and more so in emerging markets, there was going to be an impact on food security and in the most vulnerable of communities. So when we started our journey with CSI relief, I remember myself and my CSI manager said, you know what, let's just start with a food parcel drive. And if we managed to raise R1 million, and at the time, Solidarity made contributions into Solidarity as well, at least with R1 million, we can feed a number of families. I'm so pleased to report that after a year and a half of driving this campaign, we've raised 23 million rand, and we have fed thousands of families. That's been the most impacted. And the food parcels was not just within South Africa, but also in Brazil, where we have an operation. And we decided as an organization, and as well as our CSI trusts, to really make an impact where it matters. Beyond the food parcel distribution, which again we did during this period of civil unrest, we also supported vulnerable communities with water treatment, so water safety and sanitizers, because we obviously produce sanitizers. We made sure that we partner where we could with community agencies to get sanitizers out to where it's needed, to set up water sanitizers and water safety units. But the bulk of our contribution during this time of crisis has been around food security. So I hope, Georgia, gives you a little bit of a flavor in terms of what I've been busy with since I joined AECI almost 2 years ago.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And if I could ask Notu to comment on that as well, because you are right in the heart of KZN. And maybe with your HR head and also with your corporate affairs head, tell us what your company did.
Yeah, it's actually unbelievable that just 4 days is enough to make such a shake and such a move. Really, the impacts, especially the first 3 days, was real simply because the roads were blocked, so employees could not come to work. Especially the coal face employees, the frontline one that we really needed to move coal, like operators to man the machines and maintenance to do maintenance. So it was quite a challenge for the first 3 days. And I think we operated at a significantly reduced capacity, perhaps 20-30% capacity. And also because as Richards Bay Coal Terminal, we are within the port of Richards Bay. We did have a deep concern, simply a port being a key point as to whether it be targeted or not. So the impact was real, especially for the first 3 days. Thereafter, some employees were able to come to work. And to Candice's point, we also needed to really sit and think about all of this is happening in the context of COVID-19. So again, we also said employees will be on paid leave. They will take annual leave during those few days while we weather the storm and assess things. But again, another span in the works was the shortage of petrol. So now, although the roads were open, but now employees could not come to work because they had no petrol. So again, we really needed to look around to see where we can source petrol so that employees, especially key employees that are needed, especially from operations and maintenance and section managers, can be able to come to work. And we worked together as a team. And really, I can highlight that employees or people want to make an impact and want to be counted in restoring. We saw how much employees really went out of their way. We had to consistently send messages of alerting them about putting their safety first, because we obviously wanted them first safe, then business second. But we saw how much they would even do lifts if you don't have petrol and your neighbor does have a petrol and you both work at RBCT, just so that you're here so that we can continue to move coal. And what we have also done is to continue the partnership we have with 25 NPOs around Richards Bay, especially the ones that house the elderly and the children, to provide them with food parcels. I think we realized, especially in KZN, because we did have food shortage for about a week, I would say, where there was really literally no bread. And for a moment, we all reflected on inequalities in South Africa. That basic needs, when they are challenged, it's very difficult to function. Even our employees were very worried, especially about food, because people have different habits. Some stock up for a month, some a week every week they shop. So those who shop every week really had a challenge. But again, it raised so much awareness about the role that we need to continue to play to actually assist, especially NPOs and communities that are challenged, because poverty is still real. When we talk of unemployment, 50% of youth being unemployed, not contributing to the economy, not knowing where they will get their next meal. We had money, but we didn't have food. Just pause and think about that. We were restless. You have money, but you don't have food. Your situation is temporary, but there's someone whom their situation is not temporary. Every day it's a hustle where they will get food. And we saw a number of NPOs in 2020 shutting their doors because they just could not get funding. So we again went back and looked at our CSI budget and said, how can we prioritize community welfare? And so far, we have actually distributed food parcels to the value of, combined with last year, to the value of 1.6 million. It's in our own small way of contributing, especially to the communities and NPOs that house the elderly and the young ones.
That's a lot of work that you people have done. Can I actually tie this up with the crisis, the major crisis that we got into, COVID-19? And I would like to find out from both of you, one, the lessons that you learned from it, and maybe the highlights of the things that you did for communities, the highlights of the things that you did for employees. First, we start with you, Candice, there.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about the impact of COVID-19, and maybe similar to Nontu's business, we didn't have one day of complete shutdown. So throughout the pandemic, because we have an office in China, there was only about 8 people in our office in China. They're responsible for imports, exports. But by the time it hit the shores of South Africa, given the nature of our business, we quickly had to reorganize ourselves, constitute a task team with the senior leaders in the organization, and really test the mettle of our business continuity plan. So you've always had in any business, from a risk register point of view, a business continuity plan. But I think we really now had to test that business continuity plans and how it was set in place. And I'm happy to report, 400 plus days on, that we didn't have any major incidents in terms of being able to supply essential products and services to our customers. I think for us, the impact, once we were able to activate the business continuity plan, was twofold. How do we keep our employees up to date with key information, so a communication strategy? And secondly, how do we keep them safe? Whilst at the beginning of this, we were not even in a vaccination program as yet. We were just around how do we mitigate the impact of infections? How do we ensure that we have protocols in place to deal with it? And I think for me, one of the key lessons in terms of how to navigate during a crisis is to have very crisp and clear procedures and communication plans in place. So we developed pocket guides, one pages. We developed all sorts of communication to make sure that people understood, if I am infected, what do I need to do? Who do I need to contact? What does that mean for me in terms of my leave? Do I go on sick leave? Is it paid leave? What happens to lockdown leave? How am I going to be paid? So we had to ensure that we not only protect the health of our employees, but also the economic dignity, to your point, Nontu, with this escalating unemployment rates. We gave the assurance to our staff that with the activation of our business continuity plans and being able to continuously service our customers in essential supply of products and services, that was our ability to not go down a COVID-related retrenchment exercise, but rather to safeguard the economic dignity of our employees. I think I shared a little bit earlier on, beyond just navigating the impact to our immediate organization, It was also to partner with community providers. So for instance, JAM was one of our partners. They have the infrastructure in all the rural areas and able to make that impact at the point of need. So not just on a PowerPoint, not just in the boardroom making a decision, but as a leadership team to know that we contributed to a family being able to have a meal that evening. And I think that really made a difference. So I think it was a multi-pronged approach, but from a human resources perspective, our contribution to the organization was really around how do we make sure that we navigate the pandemic with information while safeguarding our employees, and at the same time communicating to the employees what's the company's response, and being able to give in the communities that our employees essentially come from, and build those partnerships within those communities as well.
Similarly, Notu, what did you learn from this pandemic, and what are the things that you have done? It's probably one of the biggest negative impacts industry has had in the last, I don't know, 50, 100 years. We can debate that, but what did you guys do?
Thanks. I think what we also did a lot is engaging with the union, SATAU, and that really worked for us from the word go. Engagements with SATAU, and also a number of our policies and procedures in HR we had to review and look at what is the most humanistic approach in light of this situation. Because it can be easy to say, it's a global pandemic. It's not an RPCT pandemic. We'll be steadfast and implement our policies and procedures as they are. But truth of the matter is it might be a global pandemic, but it's affecting individuals differently. When it affects you, it becomes a personal thing. So some of the things we did, for example, we re-looked at our leave procedure, and we built in COVID-19 leave. Because there's obviously also a difference when you contracted COVID externally. Let's say you were in the mall or church versus an employee that was a contact of an employee who was positive at work. An example will be an operator who was positive and came into contact with senior operator or rail operator. Therefore, when they go for testing, then they also test positive. Then what happens? Because obviously with COVID-19, employees safeguarded their sick leave because you don't know when you're going to get COVID and need this sick leave. So we implemented really a COVID-19 sick leave, and also to encourage employees to test when they have symptoms. We had to put this in place because otherwise you may say, please don't come to work if you've got symptoms. But if employees don't have sick leave, they're going to show up at work, right? Because they're not going to want to take their annual leave. So while we appreciate that there might be some abuse, but rather manage abuse than deny those who really need the service. So we did that, and we saw many of the cases that were reported in our clinic were actually employees out of their own quality responsibility, being a caring citizen. When they had some mild symptoms, they went to their doctor for testing, tested positive, and informed the clinic, I've tested positive. And also those who were still awaiting results, we actually gave them COVID-19 leave, because we don't want situations whereby employees have tested, but they come to work. Only when they've got positive results, they start staying at home, but you've already passed on this virus. So we did a lot of that. And even with the hard lockdown, where with level 5, where except with operators and millwrights who were at work, what we did is we said to employees, those who have annual leave, take annual leave. Those who don't, will give you annual leave in advance, because we were trying to run away from unpaid situation. Because we may say, we haven't retrenched anyone, we haven't cut any salaries, but you don't know each employee's situation. And with COVID-19, we do know that if your salary was looking after 7 people. In all likelihood, now maybe it's looking after 12 or 15.
Yeah.
So things that are also humanistic in nature. And also, George, this presented an opportunity as an organization to show how much we care. One of our values is we care for the well-being of employees. And employees are paying attention as to how much leadership cares, because people care about how much you care than what you say. So we continue to navigate this space, and we continue to look at what do we need to tweak to make it workable. Like now we are back at work, simply because we believe that we've got good measures or controls in place. And it was quite encouraging when we heard even the union talk about we are actually a lot more safer at work than at home. Because at home, not every bedroom has got a sanitizer, but at work, within 200 meters, you meet like 3 sanitizers, right? The wearing mask, the sanitizing. So those are the things that we really did, especially around HR. And we developed guidelines such as working from home guideline, because these are the things that, remember, George, many of organizations, including ours, it was still a swear word to think about flexi working arrangement. And then suddenly COVID came and said, what is flexi? People must work from home. So it was easy to manage the space of working from home, but others needed some support. Some managers also needed some support as to how do you still demand performance, measure output while one is away. What are the tools in place so that it's not a question of out of sight, out of mind? So those are the things that we have done. Also, some leadership programs that we have where we equip line managers around how to lead through a pandemic.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Jerry to ask a few questions, but before I do that, I want to ask both of you, in your own opinion, what the impact of COVID has been in the role of HR. What is the perception of HR now? Because before the COVID pandemic, the estimation is generally HR was not regarded very highly, and I stand to be corrected here. But when COVID came, it was just people. You had to know how to deal with people. What has been the impact now of that on the role, on the function of HR? I don't know, either one of you can take that one.
I would say you are absolutely right. And again, even prior COVID, George, I am of the view that you give people information how to treat you or how to treat your profession. If you allow yourself first to be a paper pusher and not be a strategic partner, and not allow yourself to know your business and engage and consistently have that chronic unease as to how can I add value? What impact can I make? Once you partner with line managers from that view, you'll be surprised that some meetings won't start until HR is there. Because HR is valued business partner. I mean, I look at our IR department, how much there's a lady there, Lindelwa Dlamini, how much leaders trust her advice, how much her office, so much traffic because people trust her. Similarly, also with training. So again, to your point, George, come now to COVID-19. It is also about HR leading the way around people matters. Although people belong in asset management or in maintenance, engineering, operations, but if you are a type of an HR practitioner that says people are yours, then you become redundant and irrelevant. You are the custodian of these processes. As an HR practitioner, how do you give the executive team the assurance that if we move to working from home, we do have systems in place to make sure that work is still done. How do we then again accelerate the change and say we can actually digitize some processes that we do? Because the fact that we've got COVID doesn't mean that talent management processes must not be in place. We still need to have talent management sessions. Later today, we'll be having a succession planning session where we're looking at our senior managers, succession planning for general management roles. Those still need to continue. The fact that we no longer have face-to-face meetings doesn't mean that it's out of the window. And how do we make sure that people, in light of what is happening, they still look forward to come to work? How do we make decisions that are also centered around people? And you become, like I said earlier on, it's important to be known to stand for certain things. Because sometimes as HR, in many processes, we tend to say, I will hear what the lines say before I comment. No, before I hear what my colleague, Naidu, who's the GM for Asset Management, and Zipeno Ngane, who's the GM for Operations, I already do have a suggestion. Right? Well, what do you think if we do this? I deliberated on this. The benefits of this is this, and what's your take? And you are not in a bully manner, because they trust you. They trust you because it's about he's an engineer by trade, and we love him for that because he's smart. If our machines fail, within 2 weeks our machines are up and running. They also trust you as a professional in HR and people matters. So if now you pass on the responsibility and say, no, I'll go with the flow. Similarly, when you go for interviews, it's not necessarily the line manager's decision, but it is also you as HR. You come in and say, at this level, we've got this race and this gender overrepresented. Our Department of Labor commitment, we had submitted this. We are falling behind. It is also you, HR, in your advert. You put there that preference will be given to people who are previously disadvantaged. But you are the one who gives line manager 60% of CVs of white males. But you are the one in the advert who said preference will be given to previously disadvantaged. It means go and look for Black females. Go look for equity candidates that speaks to that commitment that you have made. What you have done now, you have actually assisted the line manager in decision making. Then from these CVs that I've screened for you, which I know that our target is 35% females, already are 80% females. You are most likely to actually shortlist 80% females. Already that means you are likely to end up with a female candidate there.
Thank you. I actually hear the passion in there. I hear the passion. And Candice, in terms of your perception of what has been the impact on the role as a result of the focus on people following COVID-19?
I think Nontu summed it up beautifully. There isn't much else I can add on that, with the exception of saying that, you know, this stereotype around HR not being on having a seat at the table, I think that stereotype is long outdated, because I think as economies has evolved over time, within every decision-making board, there would be someone with a human resources angle. So I think to our earlier conversation, when we started the talk, it's really around demonstrating your value as a professional, and working alongside business to drive the business outcomes, and not have a us and them situation, and being so focused on is my opinion being asked or not being asked. I think if you make the time to understand the business you are in and to contribute to partnering with your business and line partners, there wouldn't be any type of a debate around do we have a seat at the table or not, whether we're in a pandemic or not in a pandemic. But I think Nontu captured it quite well. Thanks for the contribution.
Yes, Jerry.
Yeah, this is marvelous. And I like the comments that the two ladies have made on the perception of HR, because I'm in the HR business development space myself, the IPM. That's what we pride ourselves on. So when I see professionals like this who say no, actually that perception of HR just being a pepper pusher and a policy sort of hog, like this, you're not going to do this because policy says so. But solution thinkers, that excites me as someone who is responsible for this profession, because this is where the hope is. And I think, as Boniwe said earlier, this is why we're talking and celebrating these leaders in terms of what they've done. And I'm hoping and praying that people are taking notes, they're learning from them in terms of what it means to really be an impactful HR professional. Now, I want to start with Nontu, go back to Nontu, and I'm coming to you, Candice, because the work that we are doing now in your doctoral studies, I want you to comment on that, because I mean, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is so key. So, but I'll come back to you in my other question. I just want to come to you, Nontu. The stuff that you have done, I mean, when one looks at your CV, and I'm just going to concentrate on in 2020 or part of 2020, when you decided you were going to run on 7 continents in 7 days, and raise money for a school as a leader. Just tell us about that. How can a leader like yourself, because I'm assuming here that the impact that we wanted to make is not just to the organization, it's not just to the to your friends, but it's to the community. That just give us some insights. What happened there? Why did you do that?
Thanks, Dr. Gule. And you've rightfully said, because as a leader, you are not a leader in RBCT only, but as a leader, I always say a leader is always in the spotlight. This means what I do at Boardwalk Mall, I'm still a leader. And if you're going to confine your leadership in your organization, that means you cheated, you scammed that leadership role. Because being a leader simply means you genuinely and deeply care about people. And we live in communities, and we cannot turn a blind eye to inequalities that exist out there. To come back to the initiative that I called Go Beyond for a Child. In 2018, when I ran a 100-miler, that's 160 kilometers nonstop, there was an organization that was actually fundraising to feed children porridge, children from deep rural villages, whereby you find that they go to bed on an empty stomach, and in the morning, there's no breakfast. The only food they get really is the one that's provided by government at school. So they asked to follow my running journey. So your entry fee to the race, part of it was going to support the feeding scheme. So they asked to follow my journey because I was the only Black female running the 100-miler, because it's a sport that dominated, or a distance that dominated by white men. So I had no issue with that. They followed my running throughout the 160 kilometers. After that, the founder of that organization said, actually, as much as we feed kids porridge, we actually want to feed them hope. And I'm sorry, but because we haven't had a Black lady run 100-miler in Kakloof, would like to invite you to visit, even if it's one school, to play sport with them, but with also an intention to inspire hope, to see someone like them reflected. Because Dr. Gule, when we talk transformation and inclusion, it is about Nontu being able to see herself reflected in someone else. It is about that young Black girl from rural village sees Nontu and say, what? She has done this? That means there's hope for me too. By the way, I'm a rural village girl myself. I hail from Mseleni, so I know the struggles. So when I went to this school, Kipinkunzi Primary School in Tugutugu village in Mtuba, I was really shattered to come to learn about the conditions that they learn under. Not that I was totally surprised, because I went to government schools myself and I know how the conditions are like, but the conditions there were really dire. Some classrooms had over 100 learners in one classroom. They were using old pack homes that were unstable. And I looked at that. I did the business of the day, which is playing sports and chatting about stuff and life in general with them, just to inspire them. But I went away and said, how can I make an impact? And then I forgot about it. And in 2019, I thought of running 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 successive days. I said, no, man, I shouldn't do this just for the thrill of it, as much as I love adventure. I remember at that school, I said, why don't I use this opportunity to raise funds to build them 5 new classrooms and furniture the school? And indeed, Dr. Gule, that run, I will always remember. It's not because I was the first female from Africa to run 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, but because of the impact it has done in Dugu village. It is a fact, Dr. Gule, that genius is equally distributed, but unfortunately, opportunities aren't. Unfortunately, children from deep rural villages, they don't have the opportunities. All as leaders we need to do is to ask ourselves, how can I give a child that I meet a fair chance to succeed? All they need is just a fair chance to succeed. You will hear people talk about stories, people have feeling of entitlement to be given things. Yes, in some situations that might be the case, but majority of children in rural villages, all they need is just a fair chance to have decent infrastructure, to have resources to learn and grow. All they need is just a fair chance to succeed, so that we don't celebrate stories of Nontu, the 1 in a million.
Yeah, Nontu, that's a very inspiring story. I mean, so are the classes up now?
They are up. They were finished in February, the 16th of February this year. So the next one, Dr. Gule, in October, we're running 251 kilometers in the Sahara Desert to raise funds to build them a toilet and the administration block.
I mean, George, I know you have follow-up questions on this one, but I'm not going to allow you before I move to Candice. But this is such an inspirational story. I mean, as the IPM, just as an aside, at the 2019 conference in Sun City, in the Northwest Province, we actually said we want to support this, we want to support Nontu. We challenged our members to contribute. Whether they did or not, I don't know, because it was a private conversation. But I was inspired by this myself, just to see what an HR professional, it's not common that you do these things or that you know about them, but we're so proud of your contribution to us, and I'm so proud. Can you just imagine what that has done to the community, what that has done to the teachers? I partnered a principal in one of our townships here. I mean, just for a year, partnering him, saying to him, listen, you are a general manager. So these are the areas that you need to look at. And this is how we're going to manage the school and increase or move our results from this percentage to that percentage. And I was so thrilled. Yeah, when you come along to work with teachers, which is what you have done, Nontu, and the community, it does wonders. I'm sure we can have another session some other time to talk about the impact to the community, to the teachers, to the children, the whole outlook there. Very big difference. Candice, this one is for you. So you have enrolled and you are torturing yourself with a PhD. It's not easy. It's something that you have to convince all sorts of people, but there is passion there. There's something that said to you, you needed to do this and you needed to look to research certain aspects. What have you learned in your journey as you pursue this particular study? What are the things that are coming out? I know I referred to diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice, but what are you learning? What are you picking up?
Yeah, and I think, Dr. Gould, the opening around having to convince a lot of people, that's exactly how it works when you're a doctoral student. And with the University of Cape Town, I'm a doctoral student at the Faculty of Commerce, which means that you have to defend your research proposal, not just to local academics, but they also select an international cohort, so 1 or 2 international academics that you need to defend your proposal to. And it really boils down to something very simple, with all the research design that you can talk through, they really ask around your passion, because this started in 2017-18 for me. So I enrolled my first year in 2018. And my passion at that point in time, which is still the same in 2021, is very simple. I believe in every woman, there's that 8-year-old that believed they could do anything and they could achieve anything. And as we encounter life, as we encounter society, as we go through different levels of schooling, and to Nontu's point, some of us opportunities or no opportunities, somehow life pushes that ambition straight out of you, and you realize as a young woman, as a woman in corporate or in different fields, that society is actually very unequal. And it's not a consequence of us not having the ability. It's not a consequence of us not being able to make the contribution to the progress of society, but the opportunities is unequally distributed. And my passion and the thesis that I'm working on is really understanding the underrepresentation of women in senior management in the context of perpetual practices of exclusion in the management ranks. My study is specifically focused on an African cohort. And the reason I wanted to focus in on African voices is because we find a lot of research is being produced in the West and in Europe, and we build our lives on these theories and these practices. But those researchers didn't ask our opinion. They didn't ask what does it mean for a woman in Ivory Coast and a woman in DRC, and a woman in Zimbabwe and a woman in Johannesburg. What's been our experience when it comes to exclusionary practices in the management ranks? So my study was really focused on bringing the voices of African women into the body of knowledge, and to produce that knowledge and to start that base and the conversation from an African perspective. The lens of the research is around intersectionality, which means we're looking for the intersections of how your race, your background, your career experience, being a woman, the different fields that you are in, how does that intersect with the different types of exclusionary practices you experience in the management ranks? And then highlighting some of those exclusionary practices, building on some of the knowledge that's already available in this space that was produced in Europe, and really coming up with research findings that is proudly African. And I'm very deliberate in not saying proudly South African, because I think the South African narrative in the context of Africa is not a good one. And it was not for me, the purpose of my research was not just to look at a South African cohort. A lot of other researchers has done that. But my study, at least 50% of my participants is from the rest of the African continent. And it's very interesting to see some of the preliminary findings around what women from different parts of Africa is experiencing in relation to women in South Africa. And some of the career risks women had to take in the rest of Africa that we haven't necessarily had to encounter in South Africa. So it's still early days in terms of putting the research findings together. And I'm hoping by the end of the year, we will conclude the study, myself and Professor Kurt April. And then hopefully I'll have an opportunity early next year to share some of the research findings.
Wonderful, wonderful to be talking about that during Women's Month and you looking at all these dynamics. Ladies, tell me, and I'm asking you both this question now. You are responsible for bringing talent to your organization and building on what Candice is saying. And in bringing this talent, what are some of your disappointments? And I'm not going to confine it to just some of the challenges as you bring talent, some of the things that you wish it could have been done to make sure that the talent ends here. I mean, Nontu was referring to the fact that you know, as an HR person, the kinds of CVs that you put in front of people, but you may put a CV and you bring this person in to be interviewed. And as an HR, and I think I've been there, you hang your head and you say, but why did you go? What are some of the derailers that you see as you try to bring talent into organizations that you can advise our listeners to say, when you come in for these things, these are some of the things that we have observed. This is how you let yourself down, and you may not get the position as a result of that. What are some of those tips that you can give? I'll start with you, Nontu.
Thanks, Dr. Gule. It's a very interesting question because each person brings their own uniqueness. There's a very interesting book I once read that's titled How to Get to the Corner Office. So it highlights about 125 mistakes that people make in the workplace. And I read it, and I, even myself, picked up a few and said, oh, I was actually not aware of that. So I think one of the things that one can gain from is to actually have mentors, someone who can give you feedback, because sometimes it might not be really a weakness, but an opportunity for growth. My experience, Dr. Gule, I would say, and leaning to Candice, maybe it is my passion for empowering women, because I believe that as a nation, it is impossible for us to fly if one wing is broken. And I have been totally surprised and at the same time hurt when I look at the value that women bring in the workplace. When I think about they've been excluded for far too long, yet they bring massive value in terms of dedication, in terms of being a team player. I mean, 2017, when I got into a GM position, my team has just totally transformed. And I am just not apologetic about that. Simply, often people say, Nontu, your team is sexist because it's only women. And I'm like, do you want me to give you a list of teams that are only men? We've got belting, we've got stockyard, we've got this. So all I'm saying is, for me, what I've actually learned, and I would encourage people to give women opportunities. Research has been done also that organizations that are diverse tend to do well and better. We often as a society moan even about government, but often come election time, we are timid and skeptical to give women opportunities. We'd rather be stuck with trouble and problems that we know instead of giving women opportunities. But what I still often do when we've got induction and when I have an opportunity to speak to new employees, it is to say, find yourself a mentor, because that will first accelerate your growth in RPCT, because there's always an RPCT way of doing things, just like there will always be a Rio Tinto way of doing things, so that you don't make obvious mistakes. Having said that, I would encourage people to look for 125 mistakes that often, this book, it's titled How to Get the Corner Office, and it speaks to precisely women, and to look for some of the examples they've given there that are mistakes that women make. And I say this with so much caution because men too make mistakes. But to Candice's point, we do know that society is very harsh and brutal and unforgiving to mistakes that women make, because they are looking for things to say, we thought as much, self-fulfilling prophecy. So what I normally say to women, exercising more will not break you. It can only make your muscles stronger. It's okay if you have to do ×2 of what an ordinary man do. In the end, you'll be better and stronger.
No, I'm an ordinary man. So let me come back to you, Candice. Same question. And after that, I'll hand back to Dancy after your answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the key ways of analyzing standardization. And
the audio seems to have gone wrong there.
I'm hear you. Maybe you hear me. Can you guys hear me now?
Candice, I suggest that you log off and log back because we have a disruption coming through. I think there's that.
Maybe not you can take it. Sam, do you want to comment here?
Yeah, what was your question, Dr.
Nonti can continue.
Yeah, so not to build on what you were saying earlier, some of these lessons that we have learned, and that both men and women make mistakes. And I really was asking that question because of the passion of transformation that we want to bring into organizations. And I was just, and it's not just bringing people and they fail at the gate. I mean, let me challenge you. I was commenting at one of these organizations saying we have the Zondo Commission because HR-led rascals come into organizations. Now, what's your retort to that? We hire the people, they get into organizations, they become rascals. I must blame HR, right?
You are absolutely right. I think some of other mistakes is also to be too ambitious for growth. Sometimes you find that one is sabotaged by having a constant question of what's next. I think Candice said this earlier on, instead of focusing on what needs to be done today, instead of focusing on mastering your role. And we do maybe also Sam and Dr. Gould and George, because you are also senior, may even comment about this maybe with a younger generation, the feeling of working smart than hard. I think there's a big philosophy that's been sent out there of don't work hard, work smart. There's room for hard work, especially when you're starting your career. There's room for hard work. In fact, hard work beats talent if talent is sleeping. Then as you grow and climb the corporate ladder, the space for more smart work is created. But what helped me in my journey as an intern, trainee, HR practitioner, specialist, and as I moved up, it was really hard work. I'm still an advocate, especially to young HR practitioners, of do the hard work, be the hardest working person in the room, and value time. This whole thing of you don't want managers who will micromanage you, manage your time, and makes you come in at work late every day. It does not look professional.
Nice. Yeah, so Candice, you can take it off from here in terms of your own observation. You can disagree with me that, nothing like that happens. You never hang your head and say, why did I bring this person in here? But if you have, please just comment on that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really been around making sure people have the time to socialize within the organization. When I talk about socialize, it's not around having a cup of coffee, going for a round of golf, but understanding the networks within an organization, who's the key influencers, who's making the decisions, and building those relationships. Because whatever role you find yourself in, you're going to have to execute through other people within networks, within an organization. And I think as smart as you are, if you're not participating in those networks, if you don't have visibility with key decision makers, if you don't have the exposure, it's just going to be so much more difficult for you to make an impact and to land successfully within an organization. So I think when people assess whether they're able and capable to do a role, they shouldn't stop at their technical capabilities and their work experience. They should ask themselves the question if they really have the resilience to make the effort to build relationships and to operate within the invisible networks within an organization, because nobody's going to put it up on an org chart. And oftentimes you have the organogram and then you have the real way around how the organization works. And I think it's around understanding what is that real way, who is the people in key roles, and how to build relationships with them.
Thank you. Moving on.
Okay.
Wow. I'm looking at time, and I really believe we can carry on because there's just so much to learn. But let me reflect a little bit, and then, of course, give each one of you the opportunity to share with us what your take home is and what would you want to do different as a result of this conversation. At the beginning of the show, we mentioned that the purpose of the show is to honor and celebrate your successes as leaders in HR. And we did it in a hard way by asking you very penetrating questions that really made you think. And I think that's beneficial to the bigger community out there. You have highlighted some competencies that are traditionally not in HR, but you have mastered them so well because of the situation. And I just want to share what my take home is as a result of your input. One is, as Candice mentioned, a business continuity plan. I was really listening attentively when she talked about activating business continuity plan. And that says to me that every business, and we are assuming that every business has business continuity plan. I hope through this conversation and sharing our experiences during COVID and the few weeks, it's becoming clear that business continuity plan doesn't belong to a technical department or C-suite level. It belongs to everybody. And I think it lies squarely within HR. Also, the issue of crisis management. I think a business continuity and crisis management plan is a brother and a sister. So my take home for me is, as South Africans, maybe we need to start realizing that the fact that we don't have earthquakes and floods and all sorts of crises out there that happen, there is a need for us to have a crisis management plan at all times. And I'm fascinated also by Nondo's titles. I mean, she's wearing two titles, HR/corporate affairs, which means that there is conscious decision there that because you deal with people and people come from the society and from communities, it's natural that you will be the right person to be involved in those roles. And I think this also highlights the importance of CSI in corporations. Something that we used to do so well as South Africans, and we had forgotten about it because we have just hidden it behind the BEE, and it's one of the few core elements that you tick. But this recent crisis has highlighted to us that this is one of the core competencies of South Africa broadly, historically, actually, that should actually be brought back. That we have to have CSI as core business, as core competency of our business because it's demanded. And I guess also the whole aspect of risk management. So many risks that we needed to address, and everybody's talking about SASRIA today and how lucky we are that we have an insurance like that. And what happens to those entrepreneurs who don't have that insurance? So those are my takeaway. But also lastly, I'm inspired by what Candice is doing, going further and in her PhD and studying a subject that is so pertinent, not only to South Africa and Africa, to the whole world. So continuous development, self-development, those are my take-home, and I think you have really educated us, and this was not really in the menu, but you have brought them up by sharing with us the real stories of your own organizations. So that, for me, are my closing remarks. And I would like each one of us to just wrap up by reflecting a little bit on what is it that we have been saying, what was confirmed by our conversation, and what is a take-home, and what will we do different going forward as a result of this conversation. Anyone can start, all of us, including my colleagues, if we can do that. And I'm mindful of the fact that Nondu has to rush to another engagement. Maybe we should start with you.
Thanks, Sam. I will wait for the closing remarks before I go, so I can just go maybe 5 minutes late.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Well, I can go, but I was deprived of a question that I wanted to ask, and maybe I will sneak in this opportunity and just ask the two ladies. Really, because of the environment that we're in, it's very difficult for employees, but also the demands on employees from outside, from within to perform. The role of coaches in your organizations. Would you call your organizations organizations that have a coaching culture? Because in my time growing up in companies, I did so many roles, but I didn't have a coach. And I say to people, if I had had a coach, I probably would have performed much better. I'm not saying I didn't do well, but I think I would have done better. What role for coaches in this environment for your employees?
Perhaps they should answer that question and then, of course, link with the checking out, George, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, I think for us, and I want to go back to the pandemic that we've been battling for 400 plus days, with the focus on just returning to business and ensuring that we are able to activate those business continuity plans, able to service our customers, the line manager becomes the coach. And it's around soliciting that competencies within our line managers, how to coach the employees for performance and not just to correct people along the lines of tasks. So how to produce. And I think that's a competence most certainly as an organization, we still need to develop more because it's not a natural inherent capability of a lot of line managers, because oftentimes they get into these roles because they were technically the best person to perform within their teams and you recognize their potential. And for that reason, we've had a long history of management development programs through business schools like GEBS. This year we're introducing Stellenbosch. And we put our managers through there's a foundation, middle management and senior management development program. And we put hundreds of our line management and talent population through that experience. And as part of that training, it's also around how to manage behavior in the organization and how to coach people for performance. So I think it's an absolute essential, and we've got systems in place within the organization around how to actually develop that competency. I think my closing remarks, just back to Sam's point, is really that, when you think about where we are as a society, I cannot overemphasize the importance of collaboration and people coming alongside each other and really rebuilding not just South Africa, but I think that the global economies of the world, because nobody was left unscathed from this pandemic. And it's very interesting to see, even with the Delta variant, how it spread across the world. And different economies is at different stages of development. But I think there's really a demand around, from a human-centric perspective, how do we come alongside each other? How do we collaborate? Regardless of race, of creed, of ethnicity, of gender, of sexual preference. But really, if we boil it down to our very core as human beings, Homo sapiens, the human-centric approach demands that we collaborate with each other to reconstruct and to build a society and a future, not just for our generation, but for the generations to come. And I think, Sam, that would be my concluding comments. Thank you for the opportunity. I think your listeners can find my details on LinkedIn if they want to connect with me. But it's really been a very insightful and inspiring morning to have this discussion with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Candice.
Thank you. Just maybe to respond to George, and I think what you have asked, George, is a very pertinent question, because many organizations, and including ours, we big on mentorship, but not so much on coaching for performance. often you find that we leave coaching for a few identified successors, when we know full well that there are few identified as successors, but the majority are solid contributors that with coaching can also give in more. So one of the opportunities is even when a new employee comes in who's going to be a coach, coaching for performance, because a mentor is not really someone who focuses on coaching for performance, but it is more your holistic development as a person. So there's definitely more room to do more on coaching. My closing remarks would be, I think times as these requires all as leaders and HR practitioners, because if you're in HR, you are a leader of process and leader of impact, is to be more kind. I think it is a fact that you can never regret being kind. And times like this reminded us of we are all people. We are all just people. And what happens to you happens to me. What happens in UK happens to me. What happens in China happens to me. Many of us, when COVID-19 started, we were like, oh, it's happening in Brazil, not here. But we are one with the universe. So if we were just to remember that we are one with universe, and also I want to close with what our late Baba Nelson Mandela once said, what is the point of freedom if you cannot free someone else? When you are free, you are ought to free someone else. Otherwise, what's the point of your freedom? Thanks.
Wow. Thank you so much. Colleagues?
I think from my side, I'd just like to thank everybody for availing themselves in the morning. And I think it's quite a good way of starting the day and very early in the week, inspired and motivated. I think for me, the takeout mainly here, it's the fact that in the midst of everything that's happening in the world, that's happening in our everyday life, there's one thing that remains constant, and that's people. That will not change, that will not go anywhere. There isn't any organization that is bound to achieve any kind of success without people. And I think that has been emphasized quite greatly this morning by both my HR leaders, Candice and Nontuthuko. And I really thank you for that. And I really hope we just continue making a difference in the organizations that we work for. And we actually continue to advocate for good people practices to ensure that we don't only provide people with jobs, but we also provide them with meaningful careers, that will impact their lives professionally and personally as well. So thank you so much, ladies. And I'm looking forward to reading about you. I'll follow you. I'll make sure that I keep abreast of all your movements, and all the best in your careers. Thank you so much.
Sam, this has been a wonderful meal that we have had this morning. I walk out of here inspired that we have a profession. Human resources development and management is a profession. And here we have examples of meticulous professionals that hold this profession with good hands. It's in good hands. And I just wish that as HR professionals, we can embrace this. I mean, we could have gone on to other areas of ethical behavior, ethical conduct, confidentiality, things that they do. And these are people I can run to. And I just feel so privileged that we've had these two wonderful women this morning who have inspired me. This is a profession. It's one takeaway I have. Secondly, that we all have to embrace hard work. Hard work kills nobody. And we all have to aim for impact. Each day as I wake up, my choice has to be, what impact do I want to make today? And both of them spoke about the fact that we make choices. And that we have to think ahead. We have to think, where am I actually going to? They reminded me, given the fact that I'm now a senior citizen, son, about the brevity of life in terms of what would your impact have been. I'm so inspired, so excited, and thank you very much, Candice and Nontu, for your very, very insightful presentation or your discussion this morning with us. Privilege, Sam. Back to you.
Thank you. Brother George?
I can only say that it's been a privilege, really, talking to you ladies. You have raised the HR flag very, very high. I'm impressed. And I know the profession is in good hands. Just carry on doing what you are doing and even get better. It's a privilege for me to talk to you. Thank you very much. And our listeners will be privileged to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Candice and Nontu. That was our monthly Human Resources Development and Management 101 conversation show, brought to you by COMETSA Global Online Channels in association with the Institute of People Management in South Africa. You can visit their website, www.ipm.co.za. We inform and entertain. We develop and educate. We empower and support. We associate and network. That is the idea. We look forward to be with you once again in the coming month, the first Tuesday of every month. Jerry, am I right?
No, Sam, it's the first Wednesday of every month.
The first Wednesday of every month. So we look forward to welcoming you again when we will be celebrating many others in the profession. Happy Women's Month to you, Candice and Nonti. Goodbye.